Hello, everyone. We're looking at Albert Z. Carr's Is Business Bluffing Ethical from 1968, and I would regard it as a really classic essay in business ethics and the history of business ethics because it really goes to what I think is one of the root questions of any business ethics course that has to be addressed, and that is whether ethics and business really are compatible, and whether really, given the conditions under which business operates, the kind of thing it is, and the kind of things that individuals are called upon to do sometimes in business, whether ethical considerations really even belong. I think that that's a valid question. I don't know how to answer it, but I think it's a question that needs to be addressed. And so Carr's essay is really, I would say, a classic statement that ethics does not belong in business, or at least that we make a fundamental mistake if we apply the ethical principles and sensibility that we have in our ordinary private non-business life to business situations. But that is simply a mistake. Why? Well, this is not a particularly rigorous philosophical development of an idea, so I don't want to attribute to him any beliefs that he didn't actually mean to put out there. So let's just stick to what he does say. And that is that business should be thought of as a game. And rather than think about ethics, we should think about rules. And we should think about strategies. And the game that he obviously has in mind in particular is poker. And the strategy in poker that he's focusing on is bluffing, which is basically a form of deception, of pretending to have a set of cards that you don't really have in an attempt to take all of your opponent's money. Everybody in poker accepts bluffing, which is a form of deception, is simply part of the game. And so bluffing or deception in business, which he's saying is really a game, is taken for granted as being a strategy that people use, and it's not disapproved of. That's a sensible, reasonable account. But of course, the kind of ethical or unethical behaviors, the kind of behaviors that he's talking about, and he uses as examples here, go far beyond simple deception, well, far beyond bluffing, I would say. The basic idea, as I take it, is that in business, anything goes as long as it's legal. That's where you draw the line. That is, businesses are not supposed to break the law. And if they break the law, they've done wrong. But short of that, anything in business that is allowed by law is fair game. And the example that I think is most striking and challenging is the one about the mouthwash company. This is on page 147. I'm sorry, not 147. It's hold on. Let me find it. I'm sorry, it is on page 147, just a little bit farther down the page. Carr says, in one case, a firm manufacturing a well-known mouthwash was accused of using a cheap form of alcohol, possibly deleterious to health. The company's chief executive, after testifying in Washington, made this comment privately: "We broke no law. We're in a highly competitive industry. If we're going to stay in business, we have to look for profit wherever the law permits. We don't make the laws, we obey them. Then why do we have to put up with this holier-than-thou talk about ethics? It's sheer hypocrisy. We're not in business to promote ethics. Look at the cigarette companies, for God's sakes. If the ethics aren't embodied in the laws by the men who made them, you can't expect businessmen to fill the lack. Why a sudden submission to Christian ethics, I don't know why Christian in particular, by businessmen would bring about the greatest economic upheaval in history. Well, let's think about that. And this is, I think, an example that's not only challenging to everyone concerned, but challenging to Carr too, because he said that business is like poker, and that in poker, bluffing, which is a form of deception, is allowed, and no one thinks it's unethical. Does that really apply to this situation? Using a cheap form of alcohol, possibly deleterious, that is possibly harmful to people's health, is that really analogous to bluffing in poker? I would say not. If you bluff somebody in poker and take away all their money, they don't like that, but you have not harmed them. That is, they may not be able to afford losing that money, but you haven't harmed them. You've won their money fair and square, and you haven't harmed them. You haven't done anything unjust to them. But if you sell somebody, deceptively sell somebody a product that could actually damage their health, you have harmed them. And it's not part of the rules of the game where everybody understands. You have actually harmed their bodies, in a way that can't be justified by being a strategy within a game. So I find that, this example here is, we're going beyond simple bluffing. Now, if you advertise a product as being, as he mentions, being more effective than it actually is, let's say. And, let's say if you advertise a men's cologne, that in the old high karate commercials, there was a men's cologne that was advertised in a jokey way as making men irresistible to the opposite sex. And everyone knew it was a joke. But even if they didn't know it was a joke and they bought the cologne thinking that it would make them irresistible to the opposite sex, they weren't harmed when they found out that it didn't. But if you sell somebody something that's poisonous, basically, which is what they're talking about here, you've harmed them. So really, this is a very challenging example, because one can ask, well, even if it was legal what this mouthwash company did, if it was harmful, or at least potentially harmful to the health, to the bodies of the customers who consume this product, is that really like bluffing in poker? Is that really just playing according to the rules, even if they're unethical by the standards of private law? I don't know, but it's a much stronger claim than simply bluffing is okay in business, because basically you're saying is that harming people is okay in business as long as it's legal. I don't know how many people would actually accept that. But there's no reason for me to. I just wanted to focus on that because I consider it to be the most contentious example that he gives of what is a general idea, a general business philosophy, that businesses and business people are under no restraint in terms of what they do in their own self-interest or in the interest of the business, as long as it's within the boundaries of the law. And that would mean, obviously, that the responsibility to protect consumers, to protect employees, to protect business partners is up to government. Government's role is to be a watchdog on business, which is probably not a bad idea, but it's not up to business itself to adopt any code of ethics, which would just be a cover anyway, he says. Because ethics doesn't really belong in business. Strategies belong in business.